Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on a very happy Monday. I am delighted to be doing this session with Kyle from Reddit. I think having their new office here in London is going to be a great way to get educated up on this platform and figure the different ways that our clients and their brands might get involved. So I'm going to hand it right over to Kyle, and he's going to take us through a presentation with some key facts and some background and some case studies. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So please do make notes as we go along about some provocative or interesting questions to ask him. And we can do that through Q&A, or you can just raise your hand and maybe we can open up the mics when that happens. All right, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Candace. Thanks everyone for having me today. My name's Kyle Rogers. As Candace noted, I sit now in the brand new Reddit London office, and I actually am in the office right now. Normally we're work from home due to COVID, of course, but I came in to make sure that my Wi-Fi worked for this session. So thanks everyone for joining and for having me. Quick agenda here, going to give a little bit of an overview on Reddit, a little bit of how it works, and some things to think about, a little bit of the history of the company and the platform. And then, normally I'm an advertising sales guy. So normally I'm talking about the number of users and our ad products and all of that stuff. But knowing that this is maybe a little bit more of a communications or a PR focus group, I'm going to skip most of that. So if you are interested in those sorts of things, please feel free to reach out to me through Candace and Kiri, and we can set up something to talk about the advertising side. But for today I'm going to focus a little bit more on how you can use Reddit to get some insights into your brand, your campaign, products, whatever it is that you're working on. And then AMAs, or Ask Me Anythings, and how those work, as those are something that are very endemic to the Reddit platform, and something that I think carries over well to what many of you do in your daily worlds. And then of course Q&A at the end, so feel free to ask about anything that we cover, or frankly anything that I skipped, whether that's about advertising or anything else. But otherwise we're just gonna kick it off, and I'm actually gonna start with a video. So I'm gonna play this and let you guys enjoy for about a minute here.
What kind of people pick me up? I need it most. You could spend a lifetime looking for the right people. The fates kind of bring us together again.
And of course, our great advertising tagline there at the end. So that's just a quick sizzle on cool things that happen on Reddit. Of course, every platform kind of has a version of that. But I want to talk to you now a little bit about how and why Reddit is different, and the reason that we are special and important in so many people's lives. You see the stats here across the bottom. 430 million people visit Reddit every single month around the globe. In the United Kingdom specifically, that's about 30 million people. What makes Reddit different from the other platforms in kind of the social media or the digital media landscape is truly our information architecture. And it's the way that you connect to content on our platform. This is a place where instead of connecting directly to other people via a friend or a follow, you actually connect to a topic or an idea. So every little screen here on this slide is a different community, and we call communities subreddits. So when I talk, I will say the term subreddit or community interchangeably. Every single community on our platform has a specific topic, and that is what you are to talk about in that space. Each community has its own set of moderators who are not Reddit employees. These are volunteers that just care a ton about whether it's makeup addiction, streetwear, Overwatch, the video game, or something else, to volunteer their own time to set rules for this community and then enforce those rules. So for example, here toward the left, this community called Makeup Addiction, the only thing you are supposed to talk about in this space is makeup. So if I went in there and I posted a photo of a dog, no matter how cute that dog was, unless that dog was wearing makeup, that would be a post that would not go there. And that post would actually be removed or never even go live within that subreddit. And so that's something that's pretty special and pretty unique to Reddit. And as I mentioned, that information architecture actually allows us to do a ton of different things as companies, as brands, as just people using the platform. And then I would say specifically for PR purposes, some really interesting things around insights. So this organization around a topic or an idea through the form of a community or a subreddit is something that's really, really powerful. And that's what truly makes Reddit different. Some of you might be sitting here thinking, what about Facebook groups? It's kind of funny. I used to work at Snapchat, so I'm very used to Facebook kind of taking things that are special to another platform and then folding it into their core experience. We're very used to that sort of behavior. And I think more and more platforms out there are going to start to look at this. I think honestly, some of the stuff rolled out recently by Twitter where you can start to follow a topic instead of accounts. That's all because of the way that Reddit works and the power that we've seen. I'll get into our history here in a second of how we've grown consistently over time. This next slide kind of talks about the ability of our users to come here and the propensity to actually come for a specific thing. People are coming here to learn and to seek information, not just kind of scroll through and see what everyone's up to, see what your friends are up to, or what your celebrities that you follow are doing. These examples along the right are from 3 very different communities, but they're all of the posts that are kind of called out here are very high intent activities that mean a lot to the people that are there in very different ways. So in the Momit community, someone coming in and asking for advice from other moms about their 15-month-old child, something that's obviously very, very important in this person's world, and they're a little bit nervous about it. And so in this community, this person is able to get support from other people who are going through very similar things right now, and to hear, hey, you're not the only one that's dealing with this sort of thing. In the middle, from the movies subreddit, director of Parasite coming in and doing an AMA, which we're going to talk about more here in a second. And then the last one here, which I think is really interesting, there's actually a community called What Car Should I Buy? And that's not just something that we on the advertising side created. This is something where Redditors legitimately wanted advice from one another, from other people who love cars, saying, here's what my situation is, here's my budget, here's the number of kids that I have, here's the type of driving that I do. Now the rest of Reddit, give me some advice. What are the sorts of cars that I should be looking at? And we have this about all kinds of different categories. And so you can see that there's a very broad set of communities and interests that happen here, but the information that is shared goes very deep. And so no matter what brings you to Reddit, you are here to learn, you're here to dig in, and in many instances, create community with other people that share that interest. Normally, I would stop and ask for questions here before I move on, but I know we're saving that to the end, so I'll just keep rolling through. Just a quick history. So we've now actually been around for 15 years. We were founded all the way back in 2005. Co-founders, a gentleman named Steve Huffman and Alexis Ohanian. Alexis Ohanian, you might now know, other than for Reddit, as Mr. Serena Williams. He married Serena a few years back now. No longer involved in the company, but they founded it. And then about 18 months later, they actually sold Reddit. So Reddit back in this time period was one of the first kind of exits from this kind of digital link sharing social media space. And Condé Nast bought us. Condé came in, they saw this, they knew this web thing was going to be really important. They knew that Reddit was growing very quickly. And so they bought it and they kind of parked it over here in a corner. And they ran banner ads on it, used it as a source of traffic and that sort of thing. but they didn't really staff up. And it was a very kind of shoestring budget and tiny staff. I think in 2015, when Steve, our CEO pictured here, came back to the company, we had something like 10 total software engineers, which 10 years on for a web product at the time that was still very important and influential, that's nobody. You can imagine how many engineers that Twitter and Snap and Facebook had around this time. And so Steve came back in 2015 largely because even though Reddit had been neglected significantly by Condé Nast, it was still growing. And every single month we were getting more and more users to the service, even though it still looked kind of like you see here on this screenshot on the far left. It didn't look like a 2015 web or social property. It still looked kind of like 2006 or 2007. And so even though these kind of negative things had happened, there was still a lot of potential. And so Steve decided to come back to unlock that potential. He's now been here, still with us as our CEO today. We actually never had a mobile app until 2017, which is kind of absurd to think about if you remember that the iPhone was launched back in 2007. So we're frankly 10 years late to this ball game. So this is a visual of our first mobile app once we launched that. We actually bought one of the third-party Reddit readers that was out there and then folded that in and started to work that within our own code base. And now here we are, 2020. I sit in this beautiful WeWork space in Reddit's first international office. We are our first having our first foray into internationalization. So that comes with a sales team here in London. We have an operational team in Dublin. Starting next year, we will add teams in Canada, Australia, likely Germany as well. And so now we are starting to, what I would consider, truly grow up as a social media company and platform, and kind of hopefully catch up to the rest of the folks in the social space, bringing along that unique architecture that I mentioned and that unique way that people connect to content and ideas on our platform, and hopefully making it accessible to more and more people, as we still have a long way to go and a long roadmap for growth within our company. So that's the quick history. One of the cool things I love about joining this team, I've worked for Reddit for 2.5 years now, first in Chicago in the United States. You can probably tell by my accent, I'm not a local Londoner, and you'll see an example here in a bit where we're definitely still an American company. You'll know what I mean when you see the example. But it's very exciting to be here at the ground level. And as I talk to all of you and have you hear from Reddit today, even though we are 15 years old, so much is going to change in the next 2 to 3 years. And so, whether you start thinking about Reddit for your own brand or for your clients right now, or whether you're still 2 or 3 years away from using us for those purposes, that's okay. And I love that I'm here kind of at this ground floor of our journey to not just being a US company, but to being truly an international business. And so I look forward to meeting all of you over time and hopefully working with some of you with your brands. So now, as I mentioned, I'm going to skip all the number of users and all the ad products. I'll just give you a quick bit on that. To work with Reddit from an advertising perspective, it's going to be an in-feed promoted post, similar to what you would see within Facebook in the feed or Twitter in the feed. And that's going to all be bought via auction. So we very much sit within the social media bucket for the media buyers out there. And our targeting is all interest-based. So as I talked about before, using subreddits as our organizing principle, that's how we target people. We don't have a lot of information, personally identifiable information about our users. And so you see this insights word here and you're probably like, oh, how do we do that? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But what we can do is we can help you target by interest. And so back to that example from before about makeup addiction, instead of targeting maybe what you would target in the old days of demographics, women 18 to 34, you can just target people interested in makeup, and that'll capture both women and men who wear makeup and do that sort of thing. And so actually, I prefer that version of targeting, but that's how we would work together on that side of the house. So what I'm going to walk you through now is actually what we call relevance report around 5G. This was pulled together early 2019, and I actually took it to one of my clients, a US-based telco, to talk to them about how 5G was playing out on our platform. Obviously, we're about a year forward now from that conversation. So some of this, the details of this might be a little dated, but I wanted you guys to see what Reddit can do from an insights perspective, and how we could help you. This is something that we pulled on our side, but we do show up in a lot of the third-party tools out there that are pulling in social media platforms. And so you all can access a lot of this without leaning on us. And then we are actually working on our own version of kind of an insights tool that we will roll out. I don't have a timeline for it yet. I would guess somewhere middle of next year, just based on what I've heard about where they're at in the progress of this, that it would allow all of you to go in and tap into Reddit insights in a much more granular way without having to come to someone like me who works within the team, because these are a lot of things that we kind of pull somewhat manually right now. So here are kind of the insights of what people on Reddit have been talking about 5G specifically. And here are some of the ways that these come to life. So you see, this is kind of a volume report in terms of the mentions of 5G. This would be kind of similar to what you might find on some other platforms. But one of the areas that I think is actually the most interesting about Reddit compared to whether it's Twitter or Insta or other social platforms or a LinkedIn where you might be able to pull insights is actually this piece about communities that I've talked about a couple times now. So when you look at the conversations within Reddit, not only can we see the volumes of conversation and start to drill down there and look at spikes around some different things that have happened within the news around a platform or a topic, we can actually dive one level deeper. So this is a slice of information that is pretty unique to Reddit. Anyone can pull like total number of mentions of 5G, but we're able to dive in and figure out, okay, around 5G, where are the different places that this is being talked about? So from left to right, this is where it is most frequently mentioned, all the way to least frequently mentioned here. So technology makes sense, Android, gadgets, okay, I'm tracking. Futurology, now that's a really interesting, that's a Reddit specific community where people only talk about very futuristic stuff. And so the tenor of the conversation in a futurology about 5G is going to be very different than the Apple subreddit, for example. Verizon listed there, that's a US-based telco. Los Angeles, so that's interesting. Okay, now there's a specific city subreddit that has a bunch of 5G chatter. And so to me, the things that surprise us are where we want to double click, right? And go a little bit deeper. And so you see here, this is something where there was a service provider that made an announcement that they were going to be rolling out some technology within a city. And so what I love about this slide and this example is when we start to pull insights, now we have this other vector that we can dive into about how a conversation is going. Not just like 5G as this entire topic, but we can actually get lots of different slices of how 5G is discussed by people with different interests or with a different insight than somewhere else. And so the differences in the way that a topic is talked about in one community versus another is something that I think is actually super powerful. And so sitting in, a PR chair, that would be the sort of thing that I would be looking at of, okay, what do people already think? Is that what we want them to think? And if it's not, what do we need to do to start to change that opinion or to push out there what we're doing about a specific topic? And so this community slice is something that's super, super powerful. Here are some different examples of the large communities where this topic was being discussed. And so for me, what I love is then, okay, we can figure out where are the conversations. Then we can dive into what are the conversations in these different places. ELI5 is a really fun one. It's another Reddit specific community. That means explain like I'm 5. So the idea here is that people are coming and they're saying, hey, I don't know much about this 5G thing. Someone who knows a lot, can you explain this to me as if I were 5 years old? And so that's just a really interesting way to have people dumb something down to its simplest essence. And so going from the post at the top down into the comment section is another way that we can start to look at the depth of how people talk about a topic. And then here are some more verbatims, right? we see in the investing community, there is a whole conversation around which companies are going to benefit about 5G. So this is something we all intuitively know, right? About a topic, especially something like that, that's going to change the way communications work across all of the globe. Clearly, there are lots of different slices of the way people talk about it, but Reddit has a unique ability to unearth the current perceptions, the current opinions and insights. And so I personally love, even when I'm working on the advertising side of brands, what I always tell people is, even if you don't work with me and buy advertising on Reddit, you should definitely be using Reddit for insights about whether it's your brand, your products, or your competitors or the space, right? And use our platform and the depth of the information here to get to some really interesting things. So that is Reddit for Insights. Obviously, happy to answer questions as we go along toward the end. Now I'm going to get into Ask Me Anythings. This is something that kind of started on Reddit. Clearly, people use AMA as a term and do this kind of back and forth on lots of different platforms now. But Reddit still has this unique capability of going really deep for a lot of the reasons that I've just mentioned. And so I'll walk through kind of what an AMA is, how it works, and how you guys could think about it for your brands. It truly is this ability for anyone. I'm going to show you examples that include celebrities, but it doesn't have to be celebrities. People with really deep technical expertise are also great candidates for Ask Me Anythings, because Redditors, again, want to learn. And so anyone who has really deep knowledge can do a really interesting and fun AMA. So someone comes and they say, hey, here's who I am. In this case, it's Jeff Goldblum talking about my new movie. Tell what background you have around a topic, and then you allow Reddit to ask me anything. Clearly, they're going to ask about, in this case, a specific movie, but it's not going to be confined to that. So I think one thing to think about as a PR professional is if you're going to do one of these, make sure that one, you're the person, the talent knows, okay, they're not only going to ask me about this very specific piece of my job or of our company, they can ask about anything. So be ready for that. And don't hide. You can't hide from anything. So again, back to that AT&T example that I mentioned earlier, they actually did an AMA around 5G technology. And they had recently rolled out something called 5GE, which was a kind of a marketing and branding rollout. And there was a lot of discussion around that. And so my feedback as I worked with them as a partner was, okay, we can do this, and it's great that you're bringing this technical knowledge and expertise. But if we're going to have an AMA about this, we have to be willing to answer any hard questions around this topic. And if we're not willing to answer those hard questions, then we shouldn't do that AMA. And props to them, they were ready to have answers to any of the hard questions that could come up. And of course, that was the most upvoted thing, was about this 5GE. And so they had an answer. And then from then, the AMA went really smoothly. And so I just always recommend know what people are going to ask, be prepared to engage with those things. And as long as you're okay with doing that, and even if it's a hard question, being transparent and all the things that you all do really well with your brands and companies, then it's gonna be really successful. And clearly, one version of the strategy for an AMA is to lead to earned media. I think that's actually completely key, even when these start from an advertising angle, is know who's gonna be interested in covering this, and make sure you're willing to pitch it. Some of the best AMA programs I've seen done, the example across the top here from Google Stadia, that was a really smart example that came from an advertising team, but they were ready and worked hand in hand with their PR counterparts to pitch specific stories based on specific answers to questions in the AMA. And so the earned media coverage that they were able to get was actually very broad. It wasn't just, hey, this AMA happened. It was, here is some deep information. Oh, my lights went off. Some deep information about this specific topic of our brand because it was answered in an AMA. And so they generated entire stories about one answer, which I thought was super smart. The other smart thing they did in this example was they turned questions and answers into creative. So not only did they pitch earned media out of the AMA itself, but they also used it to create new assets that they ran as promoted posts. Candace asked me earlier to also discuss a little bit about how different platforms work together. I often get asked, okay, hey, we're doing this AMA. Can we link to it from Twitter? Can we post about it on Facebook or Instagram? Absolutely, yes. I love that. I think anytime that you can use all of the channels at your disposal for a program, I think that just makes the entire thing stronger. So even when I'm trying to sell ads, I like to talk to people about how you can use all of your different areas of outreach to consumers to push an activation, even if Reddit is kind of the home of that activation. So strongly recommend that you do that. Some cool examples, these are organic AMAs. So these are ones that did not have a paid promotion component to them at all. You see Bill Gates there, obviously, whenever he goes to answer questions, it's gonna be a hit. He does a Reddit AMA like once every year, every 18 months. He loves Reddit, he engages on the platform very frequently, gets tons of questions every time, of course. So that happened in I Am, which is kind of the home of AMAs. That's like the catch-all. So if there isn't a specific community about a topic, that is always a great place for an AMA to be hosted. Then here, second from the left, actress, two actresses from Pretty Little Liars. They hosted their AMA in the subreddit dedicated to that show. Obviously, everyone in that community is going to have a ton of questions for an actress of that show, so that makes total sense. Then we have a NASA example in /space. Again, there's a dedicated place for this. So all of these kind of line up, and you kind of get the strategy here. Here are examples of sponsored AMAs, and the one on the far right is where I mentioned that you know that it's an American company when we call it soccer and not football. I actually, fun fact, I started my career as a PR guy in Major League Soccer for a team. And so I've actually been a football or soccer fan for a long time. And I've kind of sat in the PR chair before. So I know what a lot of you are thinking as I go through some of this stuff. But the way that we think about sponsored AMAs is, for me, an AMA at this point becomes a creative strategy, right? It's kind of a destination or an endpoint of a sponsored program. And so the way that we think about these is they live and breathe in organic space on Reddit, but then we use advertising via promoted posts to drive interest or to drive traffic. And so whenever we do one of these sponsored AMAs, we're gonna have promotion before, during, and after the AMA. From my perspective, the after chunk is actually the most valuable chunk of promotion, because then you are driving people into a really robust conversation thread that's relevant to your brand, whether it is someone who works for your company or it is talent, either in the form of a celebrity or an influencer or someone else related to a campaign. Or just an expert of some kind. And so after the AMA happens, you run a promoted post and then you drive people back to read. And so now you're having a voice give some knowledge to your user, the target audience base of something they know really, really well, and is gonna drive an association with your brand. And so that's how we think about sponsored AMAs. Truly, they're not really that different from an organic AMA, except for we then use promotion to help kind of make them bigger in one form or fashion. And so that's kind of how those work. And that is actually the end of prepared remarks. So wanted to keep it short and sweet on the part of the program where I drone on and talk to you. But now I'm happy to answer any questions that all of you might have, either live via voice or if you want to pop them into the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was great. That was really very insightful. And I especially liked the points you made about being able to understand the target audience for almost anything by going into the communities where they're busy talking about the stuff that you're trying to unpick for your clients and your campaign. So that alone is huge, just huge. It's like a
Okay.
giant free focus group.
Yeah.
Always on, always on. One thing I did want to ask, and we'll take questions, and I can even relay the questions if they put them into the Q&A, or again, hold up your hand maybe, and we'll get the mics turned on. But in terms of a more B2B company or B2B brand, would something like an AMA, in terms of, there might be wonderful, interesting things like the engineer for an aircraft engine could do one. And I think that would probably get a lot of users, but they wouldn't necessarily be the users that are also the buyers of aircraft engine.
For
That
sure.
just, what do you think about that?
Yeah, B2B actually, because there's a subreddit about almost any topic, that does include what you might consider kind of mundane or straightforward or dry topics. So there are marketing subreddits, advertising subreddits, small business subreddits, where people who do all of those things talk to each other about that thing. And so I actually have several clients that I've worked with over the last couple of years who they run advertising with Reddit and LinkedIn. And those are kind of their two channels within this like social media space. And so we actually see a lot of that. From an AMA perspective, clearly you might change exactly who you bring to the table for something. But there definitely is an ability to reach folks in that B2B space, especially within like technology, the tech sector. There are, specific subreddits about DevOps and other very kind of heavy technical implementation topics.
Yep.
And so we have a lot of brands that use us only to reach people who administer networks and other things like that.
Okay, great. We have a question from Josh, and he asks, do experts answer all the questions in an AMA, and how long should one typically last for?
Really good question. So no, you almost never can get to every single question because there's usually a very high volume. So the expectation is not that every question will be answered. What I will say though is if you ignore the most upvoted question or the couple most upvoted questions, Redditors can kind of become a little bit annoyed with you. So definitely you want to take a look at, okay, what is like the velocity of interest in a question, and try to get to as many of the ones that a lot of people are interested in as you can. We ask that talent dedicates at least an hour of time. So please, if you are planning one of these, have the talent plan to be there for an hour. Sometimes that's been as short as 30 minutes, usually in down to 30 minutes, that's a celebrity. Like when Barack Obama did an AMA a few years back, he only did 30 minutes. So celebs get a little bit more of a pass for answering fewer questions. But if you were doing one for a company, you would probably want to give at least an hour of time. And then frankly, as long as you want to give, people are always going to appreciate that. And some of the more engaged AMAs I've seen, someone has spent an hour or two answering, and then they've actually checked back in over the next few days to answer additional follow-up questions. That's always really appreciated, but it's not a mandatory. Whenever the AMA wraps up, we always post an update that says, okay, we're done. Thank you so much. And then everyone in the thread knows that there aren't going to be any more answers.
Yeah, that's good info. And also it's a good reminder that these questions can be upvoted. So you do have a way to know what are the top ones that the majority of the people maybe want to hear. Because we have another question that asks, how do you protect from abuse and negative comments on an AMA, or really can you?
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the ways you can, but.
Yeah, good, very good question. So the answer is, in a organic only AMA, we don't fully moderate. So the question and answer will be governed by the rules of the subreddit where that Q&A AMA session lives. But as long as they aren't harassing or crossing any boundaries from a hard question, you can't guarantee that you're not going to get negative commentary about your brand, especially if it is a brand that's a lightning rod brand, right? So there will be negative questions and comments probably. That said, I have hosted AMAs that aren't in organic space, but they're in a promoted post. And if we do that, we have the ability to moderate and we can take out derogatory things. I will say that does pose a risk factor, right? I'm sure many of you know about the Streisand effect. If we were to try to moderate a negative or a hard, specifically if it's a hard question, not a derogatory question, that could actually blow up in our faces and make things worse. So I actually recommend you don't do that sort of thing, but it is possible if we host the AMA in a promoted post instead of in just a subreddit.
This is sort of related, but Claire asks, in terms of real versus fake news, what role does fact checking have? How is this managed in the Reddit communities, or is it?
Yeah, it is. So as I talked about earlier, the moderators that keep the conversation going within a community are a big piece of that. The vast majority of our, what I would consider like the hard-hitting information-based subreddits, there's one called Science, and you actually have to be a scientist to be a moderator of that community. And so they have very stringent rules about the types of things that you can post. In that community specifically, it has to be peer-reviewed research, even like research that is done to high standards but has not yet been peer-reviewed. In many cases, can't be posted in that specific subreddit. We also, obviously, hot topic for now and for the last 8 months, the COVID-19, the coronavirus subreddit, there are many of them. And there are, in almost all of them, there are standards about the truthfulness of the information, and the moderators enforce that. We then have rules on top about misinformation and disinformation that Reddit has put out around that topic specifically, and many others. And we have our own enforcement team kind of on top of the moderators. We call them the anti-evil team that keeps an eye out for that sort of thing. So there are layers to that moderation, and it is obviously super, super important.
Yeah. Here's a question from Maximilian, who wants to hear a little bit more about how influencers work on Reddit, because upvoting and downvoting make it unique among the platforms. What are your insights on whether some Reddit users are more influential than others?
Really good question. And thank you. I probably should have proactively put something in the slides about this. So influencer marketing isn't a thing on Reddit in the way that it exists on other platforms. So I would not recommend that you come to Reddit and find an influential Reddit user and then pay them to talk about your brand in the way you might on TikTok or Insta, Facebook, whatever. From our perspective, the community is the influencer, not the individual. That's not to say there aren't specific Redditors who do have big influence in communities based on their track record over time and their stature. Those people do exist. But because authenticity is so important on our platform, if anyone ever found out that someone was getting paid to talk positively about a brand or a product, that wouldn't be very widely accepted or enjoyed within Reddit. And so the way I would think about influencer marketing is if you're working with an influencer from whether it's Twitch, Insta, TikTok, wherever, bring them to Reddit as your creative. So whether that's an AMA, whether that's video creative or whatever that is, bring them to our platform in your creative and then target the people that care about the thing that they are famous for, whether that's makeup or gaming or whatever that is. Don't pay someone to just talk about your product. So that's kind of number one. Number two is everything I just said is probably going to evolve because we have something in our platform called RPAN, Reddit Public Access Network, which is our kind of fancy brand term for live streaming. And so now we actually have people who are entertainers that are on Reddit, whether it's musicians or whether it's people who are chefs that are making different recipes on live streaming. That behavior is new to our platform, even though it's existed on other platforms for a while. So because that behavior is new, I do think everything I just said will evolve. And if those people become influential on Reddit, which they are and they will, eventually that ability to kind of engage with them around a paid promotion, that will be more widely accepted. But if you're in a technology community talking to a user who's just really smart about technology, I would not pay that user to talk about your product.
Yes.
So I'm talking out of a couple sides of my mouth here, but it is fairly nuanced within Reddit.
Yes. And in terms of celebrities or really, top level, I guess, key opinion leaders or influencers, I'm going to assume that there's quite a few subreddits devoted to celebrity type individuals. So say, for example, David Beckham.
Yep.
And does that ever often, open a possibility for some of the brands that David works with?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, those communities exist. There hasn't been a lot done with that yet. I'm sure that is coming. As I mentioned before, we're 15-year-old company, but in reality, like a 3 or 4-year-old business. And so I think a lot of that will start happening more and more. So honestly, if I were sitting in all of your chairs, that's an opportunity to be early to a space where that hasn't been done much. So I would recommend do some thinking on that, and feel free to reach out and we can figure out a right way to do that.
I also just sort of reinforce the insights or research angle. If you're thinking about ambassadors, athletes, or celebrities, what have you, trying to pick the right one for the brand, go to Reddit and see what the people are saying, and see who loves that person, or that you could get away from sort of the stereotypical kind of notions. There is a good comment, actually, this is not a question, but a good comment from Stuart, who says, in terms of B2B, he saw that this morning Rolls-Royce announced a new nuclear power station partnership, but that was the top discussion topic in the nuclear power community.
Absolutely.
So you can't get more hardcore than that.
For sure. And obviously brands exist and are talked about on Reddit all of the time. So I think the thing to think about for you all is the authentic piece. How can your brand authentically engage? For some brands, that might only be the insights area. For other brands, there is a license and there should be a conversation to happen. I would always just recommend you do the listening and the diligence first before you design a strategy. One other note to your previous question, Candace, one interesting example that no one's done anything with yet, but could be interesting. Janelle Monáe, the artist, actress, singer, songwriter, she's actually a moderator of a Reddit community, r/popheads. That's all about pop music. So that's a really interesting example of a celeb who organically engages on Reddit as a mod, which is the only one I'm aware of. I'm sure there might be more that we don't know about yet. So there are going to be, over time, some really interesting ways to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, great. Here's a question that is from Paul. He says he's seen Reddit as a source of stories for journalists, or, in his experience, a PR stunt, in fact, was picked up by accident, I guess, via Reddit. And with that in mind, do you have any tips or insights on how PRs can utilize the platform to seed a story or an item on Reddit?
Yeah, I think that's one where my recommendations would be just to be careful and to be authentic. Again, if people find out that the only conversation taking place about a topic or about a brand on Reddit is from usernames tied to that brand or to the PR agency of that brand, you could kind of get found out a little bit. Certainly, I know those kinds of things definitely happen. I can't say I've never posted a question in an AMA with a brand, right? Like those things clearly are going to be taking place. But just be smart and be careful and just be authentic, right? If you're going in and posting about something that the average consumer would never talk about in relation to a brand, and you're putting that on Reddit and then trying to build a story around that, there's some risk factor there. But you guys are all smart. You know how to make these things work and how to make journalists start to pay attention. So I won't tell you not to do your jobs.
No, but it's almost a little like Wikipedia, that is forbidden for most reputable PR agencies, will not try to adjust that for their clients. that's just going beyond. Here's a question. I think you've answered this in a lot of the things that you've covered already, but in terms of how safe it is for clients to engage on Reddit.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there was there's a perception probably 2 to 3 years ago that Reddit was not a brand safe place, and you should kind of completely proceed with caution or put it on a blacklist. Thankfully, that's not the case. I wouldn't work here if that was true. But again, I would always just recommend like being smart, knowing the lay of the land before you bring a client to engage directly. To me, the worst thing you could possibly do is sell in an approach or a strategy, bring a client, whether it's for an AMA or just to organically engage or whatever that is. And then we find out that this subreddit hates that brand for whatever reason. We would always want to know that in advance, right? So always just do your research, start with listening, figure out the lay of the land for a brand. One example is AMD, the processor, chip processor. That is a beloved brand on Reddit. The AMD subreddit, everyone there is like a huge supporter of that brand. And so that is one where I used to work with them when I was based in the US. They think a lot about how to engage on Reddit, and it's going to be not easy, but a straightforward thing for them to do. EA, on the other hand, they had kind of a disaster that happened primarily on Reddit 2.5, 3 years ago. And so them coming to Reddit, even for advertising with comments off, was a scary thing for that brand. And so I think you just need to know where you sit within that ecosystem and then figure out based on where you sit, okay, is this easy? And we're just going to come in and announce ourselves and have a conversation? Or do we need to be a little bit more circumspect and kind of roll things out more slowly and go with things at a slower pace?
Yes. Now here's a question, anonymous question. What's the best way to identify UK only communities?
Really good question. So some will denote themselves. Casual UK is a large community. It's none of our communities only exist within a specific country or jurisdiction, but obviously that one is primarily people who either live here, from here, spent time here, whatever. We actually hosted an AMA for a brand last Thursday in Casual UK for Quick Fit, the car repair shop. So that's one that it's easy to figure out. We can also pull on our back end some insights in terms of which communities are frequented by people within a different country. So if we're working together, we can help you figure those things out. Unfortunately, there's not like an easy search within Reddit that's like UK only and here's all the communities. So it will take a little bit more effort than that. There is a third-party tool that maps subreddits that's really, really smart. I'll send out, Candace, to you, and you can pass along to the team. If you were to put r/London or r/Casual UK into that tool, it would create this kind of constellation of other similar subreddits that you could understand are primarily folks that live in the UK.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I'm going to assume in terms of advertising, it's of course targeted by passion or by community interest, but can also have the layer of geography.
That's exactly right.
Okay, great. Now, another question is, how would people on this webinar, how do they access the insights like the 5G one you presented?
Yeah, so that one was one that our team put together and then rolled out directly to clients. So that one is kind of a specific work product. We do put out just some like general non-advertising specific things within like our Reddit blog. So that's something that I would keep tabs on. And then obviously like, PR that comes out that Reddit proactively puts out into the space. And then honestly, our site search is a good place to start. It will never go as deep as what I showed you. But if you go into kind of the search on Reddit and start to put in terms, you start to see things, communities that are relevant, and then you can search by community as well. But for something that in depth, you would kind of have to go through our teams. And then, like I said, there is going to be a third-party tool that will roll out. Once that drops, you could imagine that, agencies and companies and teams will have a way to sign up. I would think initially when that rolls out, it'll probably roll out to folks that we are partnered directly with, generally through advertising, but not only. And then it will start to become a public facing thing. And then I would say, make sure to look into your third party kind of social aggregators, whether it's Brandwatch, Crimson Hexagon, whatever you use for that sort of a function. Reddit is often pulled into those. It doesn't have the ability to slice always by things like subreddit. So one thing I would maybe recommend is use that as a starting point, and then maybe reach out to someone like me, where I can direct you to the right folks, and then we can maybe help you go a little bit deeper.
Great. Now, one of the things that we talked about earlier, Kyle, which was some of the action that gets sort of sparked by Reddit, a lot is in the gaming world, and downloads of new games and people talking about them or recommending them. And that actively leads to increase in getting those things downloaded, which makes total sense. I'm wondering, actually, you know how hard it is for brand apps to gain any kind of volume, either a branded game or a branded app. And I was wondering, do you think Reddit is a good place for those kind of sort of campaigns?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see, and this is kind of one of the really salesy slides that I was not going to show all of you, but I'll throw it up there since you asked. We see that because people come here to learn and to engage deeply about the topic, if they care about that topic and your brand is relevant to that topic, and your brand is either talked about organically or there's like an advertising sort of thing, it drives action. So because Redditors care about something, they come to learn about that thing. If the brand is talked about, then they go and act on that, whether it's through buying or downloading or just going to a site. So that happens all of the time within the platform. So yeah, I mean, the question is always the scale, right? So how many people are in the target audience for your product, your company, your brand? There's always a version of a conversation that's relevant to you. Gaming is one where there's a ton. And so many, many gaming companies come to us for advertising purposes. Technology is another space. All the entertainment properties, especially still in the US, but now internationally as well, come to Reddit. And then the other one that maybe is a little bit more surprising, but I've touched on a few times, is things like makeup and healthcare and skincare. Because there's a lot of advice that people give each other in that space, when a product gets talked about in a Reddit community, that product sells out. And so it happens very frequently. And so to me, again, the question is just, what's your product? How are people talking about it, or how might they? Who are the people that are interested? And then do we organically engage in this space, or do we run advertising to target those people to get there?
Yes. We had a couple of questions about the relevance reports. Those insights are very interesting to all of the folks on this call. And one extra question was that they appreciate that it might be scalable depending on the ask, but do you have like a ballpark on the starting point for cost?
You know,
yeah,
really good question. We actually don't charge explicitly for those. That's right now, we've really only been providing them to essentially advertising partners, or, you know, people that our biz dev teams and our PR teams are working with. So we actually don't sell them. We do understand that there's a lot of value there. And so I think over time that might start to change. And so what I would say is, for now, come through Candace and she can put you in touch with me, and we can find out if there's anything relevant to your brands, and I'll kind of share what I can. That said, obviously, you know, my day-to-day is the advertising side of the world. So we won't just start churning these out of nowhere, but know that we understand that there's a ton of value there. And over time, we will definitely look to different ways to make them available to folks like yourselves.
That's fantastic. I do think, again, the value of simply going onto Reddit with an eye toward the communities that are talking about the sector your client is in, be it parenting, be it gardening, be it aircraft engines, hearing what people are saying. And that, you know, even if we're looking primarily for maybe earned opportunities, editorial things, actually going maybe I should start to do some advertising in those communities and see the reaction and have that start to happen. I also don't know if you've seen, it occurs to me that it might be a great place, again, depending on the passion for that brand or product, to launch a new product.
Yeah,
Like I could see a sneaker launch happening totally on Reddit.
for sure. That example I kind of called out earlier, Google Stadia. Reddit was actually their key creative strategy for launching Stadia as a product. It had been announced last spring. And then in the fall, when they started proactively messaging it with both kind of PR and advertising, Reddit, an AMA was actually the first thing they did. And then they promoted that AMA across all of the different social media channels. So yes, 100%.
Yes, wonderful. I think we're at the end of our time. I am thankful to everybody that joined and all the questions. I think we got to most of them. So I hope if you do have any additional questions, by all means, ping either of us and I can follow up. Kyle can follow up. But Kyle, any last words? We really appreciate your time. And I think it was an excellent overview of all the different aspects of Reddit.
No, thank you so much for letting evil sales guy come talk to you today about PR. I appreciate it.